Early autumn evenings in Cedar Valley always carried a light all their own, warm as honey and slow as the breath of land cooling after a long summer. The community hall glowed under oil lamps, ribbons hanging from old timber beams, and the fiddle marked each beat as laughter rose from families who had known one another for years. Folks said the autumn dance was more than harvest celebration. It was the night lonely hearts might find something worth holding on to. Talia Reed stood close to the wall, smoothing the wine-colored dress Mrs. Whitmore, the boarding house keeper, had lent her. The yellow lamplight brushed her smooth brown skin, softening every line. But her eyes that always measured every escape route, did not rest. She offered small smiles to townsfolk, but the smiles never reached her gaze. Cedar Valley only knew her as the new schoolteacher. They did not know she had fled a marriage that closed her heart layer by layer. No one knew the nights she lay still, listening to her own heartbeat quicken at the thought of a name she tried to bury. For 6 months, she had lived quietly, keeping a distance just wide enough to feel safe, yet not so wide that anyone would suspect. She thought tonight would pass as calmly as everything she worked to keep calm. But then the hall door opened. The man who stepped in stopped her breath cold. A long black coat, a face so familiar it cut through memory like a blade. Eyes sharp, cold, carrying the kind of power one taste of could mark a life forever. Marcus, her former husband. No shouting, no anger, no scene. Only those eyes sweeping the room, slow and deliberate. When they landed on her, Talia felt her knees weaken. No one else in the hall sensed anything amiss, but something inside her broke with a low crack. She swallowed the rising panic, fighting to keep her face steady. But Marcus began walking toward her, one step at a time, as if the whole room had narrowed to a single point. She stepped back and brushed against a man passing by. She turned to apologize, and that was when she saw him. Samuel Barrett. Taller than most men in the room, built solid beneath an earth-brown shirt, hair a bit long falling over his brow, a quiet face marked by experience, the kind Cedar Valley whispered about. He lives at the mountain's edge, keeps to himself, and no one pushes him. He stood alone, leaning against a post, holding a glass of water. His eyes were cool but not cruel, distant but not dangerous, only wary of the world. Talia did not think. Her body chose for her. She moved to his side, close enough that the pine scent of his shirt mixed with the lavender in her hair. Their breaths crossed for a brief moment that shook her inside. Her voice was barely more than air. "Please, help me." Samuel turned. His gray eyes were cold, yet deep, holding something long kept quiet. He studied her long enough to read the fear hidden beneath her practiced calm. Then he looked past her to Marcus approaching. The lines of his face tightened, a quiet instinct rising. He set his glass down. One step, another. His arm eased around her waist. Not forceful, not claiming, simply steady, like she had belonged there a long time. Heat rushed through Talia's chest. She barely dared to breathe, but her body loosened, if only a little, for the first time in months. Samuel faced Marcus with a calm, steady gaze, firm as steel, and he said, low and clear, loud enough for those nearby and sharp enough to stop Marcus, "She's with me." Marcus halted at once, not startled, not angry, just paused for a single beat, so small others might miss it. But Talia saw it. She saw the slight curl of his mouth, a smile without warmth, a smile that carried the chill of a man who knew exactly the power he once held. Marcus's eyes shifted from Samuel to Talia. Slow, deep. A look stripped of emotion, almost casual, yet cruel in its certainty, as if he were reassessing an old possession someone else had dared to touch. He adjusted his collar and clasped his hands behind his back, a small motion, but one that felt like a reminder that he believed he still held some measure of control, at least in his own mind. Finally, he spoke, a low, clear line that made the room feel colder around her. So that's how it is. No one understood the meaning except her. An admission, a warning, a promise he would not step aside. Marcus tilted his head, taking in Samuel's face as if committing every feature to memory, then stepped back toward the dark by the door. He did not look away from them until the fiddle filled the uneasy silence, and he vanished into the night. Talia felt Samuel's hand tighten slightly, not in possession, but in reassurance. The room Talia rented sat on the second floor of an old wooden house at the town's edge, where the wind through the willow branches was louder than the passing wagons. The morning after the dance, she sat by the window with a steaming cup of tea, her hand trembling slightly, as if she still could not believe what she had done the night before. Early autumn sunlight filtered through the glass, touching her cheek, but its warmth only reached half her heart. The other half remained guarded, wrapped in the habits she had forged over years of caution. The room was simple: a small bed, an old wooden wardrobe, a few books she had brought with her, and the plum-colored shawl she often used to hide the slightest tremor. Everything was spare, arranged with a kind of anxious precision, the wardrobe locked tight, the curtains drawn just enough, the chair placed near the window so she could watch the street each night before sleep. It was the way she had lived for a long time. Quiet, orderly, always aware of every angle around her. Before Cedar Valley, her life had been very different. Before Marcus stepped into it. Before his voice became the sound she could never escape. At dawn, in the thin veil between sleep and waking, pieces of old memories drifted back like shadows she had not invited, Marcus's hand tightening around her wrist, never leaving a bruise, only enough pressure to remind her who decided everything. His voice soft but sharp as a blade, speaking words that ground her self-worth down grain by grain. No shouting, no smashed furniture, only those moments when he smiled, tilted his head, and said quietly, "You don't need the piano anymore. You have me." The piano had been her breath, and she had left it behind. Talia shook her head gently, pushing the fragments back. Here in Cedar Valley, she had told herself the past was a closed door. She fastened her shawl and left for the small schoolhouse where she taught. And there, among the worn benches and the faded blackboard, she found a rare bit of peace. The children adored her, not because she was strict or skilled, but because she knelt to their eye level when they made mistakes and encouraged them with a small smile instead of scolding. She taught them letters and numbers, teaching as though she herself were learning to trust the world again. With adults, it was different. Talia always kept distance, polite, but far enough that no one asked questions that cut too close. She knew kind inquiries could sometimes be the blade that opened old wounds. Yet this morning, as she wrote on the board, her mind kept circling back to the moment last night. Samuel's arm around her waist. That light touch, not intentional, but steady enough to leave a warm echo across her hip. She remembered his eyes, gray, still, as calm as a deep lake, and how they made her feel safe in a way she could not explain. A safety built not on power, as Marcus had wielded, but on presence. on steadiness, on something unspoken yet real. While teaching, she wondered why her heart tightened when she thought of him, safe and seen, as if she had not only been someone he protected last night, but someone he truly recognized. By midday, when the children ran outside to play, Talia sorted through her papers, trying to hide her own unease. But when she stepped out of the schoolhouse, she stopped short. Samuel Barrett was there, leaned against the wooden fence, hat pulled low, his shadow stretching long in the afternoon light. He did not smile or hurry. He simply stood there, steady, as if waiting for her were the most natural thing in the world. Talia touched her shawl, feeling her heartbeat slip out of rhythm. Samuel tipped his head and spoke, his voice low and even. "I'll walk you home." Not a question, not a demand. Just a simple offering, firm as stone. And somehow, Talia did not fear it. She felt lighter. For the first time in years, she let herself walk toward someone without looking back to see the nearest escape. Samuel Barrett lived almost 2 miles outside Cedar Valley, in a lone wooden house set in the late-season golden grass. From his porch, he could see the Sienna Ridge, blue in the mornings and deep red each evening. Folks said he was made for wide land and strong wind, places where few words were needed, only steady hands and a quiet heart. His home was as simple as he was. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a gun rack on the wall gathering dust, the large bed he had built himself, and belongings kept with a care that made it seem each piece held a part of a story he never told. His horse, a light brown gelding named Alder, was always grazing near the fence, lifting its head whenever it heard his steps. Samuel was not a man of many words, not because he was cold, but because he had learned that people often twisted words into what they wanted, not what he meant. Years earlier, a misunderstanding had left him the subject of quiet talk, a cattle dispute where he'd only tried to mediate, yet ended up blamed. Rumor traveled faster than truth, and from then on, Samuel chose the quiet outside town. No bitterness, no complaint, just a step back to where he could breathe easier. But after the dance, his mind did not settle as it usually did. He could not forget the way Talia trembled in his arms, like a small bird seeking shelter in hard wind. Not fear that made someone scream, but fear pressed down for too long, surfacing the moment a steady arm found the right place to hold her. Samuel was not one to pry into others' lives, but her eyes, that tremor, and the way she whispered, "Please help me," all of it echoed in him like hoofbeats on dry earth. The next afternoon, passing through the market for nails to mend the stable roof, he saw her standing at the apple stand, her hands unsure beneath her dark shawl. She looked calmer than the night before, yet her eyes still searched every corner of the street. He had no intention of going near. He only wanted to see that she was all right. But as he walked past, Talia turned at the same moment, and the basket slipped from her hand. Samuel caught the handle, and the back of his hand brushed hers. Both of them paused. A light touch, so quick any onlooker would think it accidental. But for Talia, her heart stopped for a beat. A small current ran from her hand up into her chest, and for Samuel, he held her gaze for half a second, but that glance pulled her still amid the bustling street. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice roughened by surprise. "It's nothing," Samuel said, though his eyes did not leave hers right away. There was something in that look, not demanding, not probing, yet it made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. When she left the market, Samuel followed at a distance, not close enough to draw attention, not far enough that he couldn't reach her if she turned back. She didn't notice. But for him, it felt natural, the way he checked the fences whenever the weather shifted. At the boarding house door, she turned and saw Samuel standing in the dirt road, hat in hand, silent. She hesitated, but warmth spread through her chest. "You followed me home?" she asked, her voice soft as wind. Samuel tipped his head, offering no long explanation. "Just wanted to see you got there." Talia bit her lower lip. Her heart slipped again in a quiet, pleasant way. But the moment broke as she stepped onto the porch. At the far end of the road, where the evening light was fading, Marcus stood. He did not approach. He did not call her name. He only stood there, still, hands behind his back, his gaze sharp as a blade laid across the open space between Talia and Samuel. A cold line ran down her spine, and Samuel, though she did not see it, had noticed the man long before, and he knew this would not end here. Word that Talia had been avoiding Marcus swept through Cedar Valley as fast as autumn wind along the eaves. Curious glances followed her wherever she walked. People whispered just loud enough for her to catch the fragments. Her ex-husband? Poor schoolteacher. And Barrett looks at her real close. Talia tried to keep her steps steady, but her mind was tight as a drawn bowstring. Each time she left the schoolhouse, she glanced down both sides of the road, half dreading Marcus calling her name, cornering her, forcing her to listen the way she had been forced all through their marriage. That afternoon, as she locked the school door, Marcus leaned against a pole in the distance. He did not approach. He did not raise his voice. He only waited, as if his presence alone restored his power. "Talia," he called, low and smooth, yet carrying a note that crawled up her spine. "We need to talk." "Not now." Her voice was soft but firm. "You know I hate having to chase after you," Marcus said, a faint smile touching his lips. "But the more you run, the more I worry." To anyone else, the words sounded gentle. To Talia, they dragged behind them a chain of suffocating memories. She stepped back on instinct and brushed into a tall, solid figure behind her. Samuel. He arrived as quietly as wind, but stood as steady as oak. The scent of sun, dry grass, and worn leather from his coat eased the tightness in her chest. She said, "Not now." His voice was low, not raised, not harsh, more like a stone rolling down a ridge. Final, unquestionable. Marcus held still for a moment, the polite smile cracking. But pushing Samuel Barrett was something no one in town was eager to test. So Marcus only shrugged, offering a half-promise with an edge. "Fine, Talia, but you will have to hear me." Then he walked away. Talia exhaled slowly, almost soundlessly. Samuel watched her a moment, then spoke in a tone that wasn't pressing, only true. "You don't have to carry that alone." Talia gripped the strap of her bag, trying to steady her breath. I'm not ready to face him." "Then don't." Samuel said it as if things did not need to be made difficult. "Come with me for a few days. Up on the prairie. Quiet. No people. Enough space for your mind to settle." The offer startled her. Not with fear, but with the uncertainty of someone who had not been given a safe escape in a very long time. "You're sure it's no trouble?" Samuel let the corner of his mouth lift. "I'm inviting you." They left town at dawn the next morning. No one saw them go. A thin veil of mist clung to the ground, settling on Talia's shoes and on the bridge of Samuel's nose. Alder, the gelding, breathed steam into the cold air. Samuel lifted Talia onto the saddle first. She sat unsteady, her hands searching for a hold and slipping on the smooth leather. "Put your hands on me." His voice was low, steady. Chicot hesitated, then set her hands at his sides. The firmness beneath his denim made her flush, but more surprising was the sense of steadiness that moved from him into her like early autumn warmth carried on wind. When the horse started forward, she leaned slightly. Samuel caught her hand, guiding it into place against him. Not awkward, not overly familiar, just sure. "Hold like this," he said. "Safer." She nodded, though her heart beat too quickly for reasons she did not yet understand. The road to the prairie opened slowly, tall gold grass, birdsong blending with hoofbeats, the scent of pine and thin morning fog. Neither spoke, yet the silence felt easy. Talia rested lightly against Samuel with each rise of the saddle, feeling his warmth through the chill. On steep stretches, he placed his warm, broad hand over hers to steady her. Each touch was small, but enough to make her feel tended to, a feeling she had long denied herself. By the time they reached the foot of the ridge, the sun was high. Samuel's cabin appeared in a clearing of deep green, clean-cut timber walls, bright windows, steps neatly swept. Not the cold, barren place she imagined. It felt warm, kept, carrying the breath of someone who lived in quiet and guarded what he valued. Samuel halted the horse at the porch. "Welcome," he said softly, "to your place for now." Talia looked at the cabin, then at him, and for some reason, her chest eased with a warm, sinking breath, as if she had spent half her life walking toward the place she was meant to reach. Morning at the foot of the mountain opened with a soft light, a pale gold ribbon falling across the prairie. Talia woke to the smell of roasted coffee, rich and warm enough to make her forget she was sleeping in a house far from town, almost in another world. When she stepped outside, she found Samuel on the porch, holding a metal coffee pot. The early light cast across his face, sharpening his straight nose and the quiet depth of his eyes. He turned toward hers, and in that moment, Talia felt her heart pause inside a hush. "Did you sleep all right?" His voice was low as pine wood. "I haven't slept that deeply in years," she said, embarrassed by how her eyes lingered on him. Samuel poured her a cup, offering it with both hands. When she reached for it, the heat of his palm startled her more than the warmth of the tin. A brief touch, yet enough to leave her steadiness off balance for a few seconds. All that day, they moved as though they had known each other far longer. Samuel split wood in the yard, while Talia gathered each piece into a basket. Once, when he handed her a log, his fingers brushed the back of her hand, unintended, yet enough to draw a strange ripple through her chest. As she bent to tie her boots, Samuel stepped behind her to adjust her scarf. "It'll be colder tonight," he said. His fingers grazed the back of her neck as he lifted the scarf, sending a shiver down her spine. Not of cold. In the kitchen, they made a simple stew. When she passed him a bowl, her hand slid along his forearm by accident. Samuel paused for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to know he felt something too. But he said nothing, only ladled more stew and set it before her with his usual calm. That afternoon, he led her to the horses behind the cabin. When a young colt came too close, the wind tossed a strand of her hair across her cheek. Samuel lifted his hand, smoothing the strand behind her ear. The gesture was so light, it almost wasn't there, yet its tenderness caught her breath. The silence between them never weighed. It was the kind that made two people want to stand closer. Evening brought colder wind down from the ridge, carrying the mountain chill. Samuel lit the fire while Talia sat on the rug nearby. The glow touched her face, deepening the brown of her eyes until they seemed to hold the whole autumn sky. "Tell me about music," Samuel said, as he placed another log into the flames. Talia looked up, surprised. "The piano?" "Yeah. Everyone has something that once made their heart burn bright." He said it as if he saw the hurt in her, but refused to press on it. Talia clasped her hands. "I wanted to be a pianist. Not famous, just living with it." She gave a small, sad smile. "But I wasn't allowed to play anymore." Samuel didn't ask why. He simply waited, at the exact pace that made her feel safe to continue. "Music was the only thing that made me feel like myself," she whispered. "Giving it up felt like cutting off a part of me." Samuel listened with absolute respect. No judgment, no interruption, only presence, song. Steady as the wood he had shaped for years. "Talia," he said quietly, "there are things a person shouldn't lose, no matter what they're told." She looked at him. Long, too long, as if one more breath might close the distance between them. Samuel stood, took his thick wool coat, and draped it around her shoulders. "Sitting close to the fire like that can chill you afterward," he said, gentle but full of care. Talia held the edge of the coat, feeling his warmth still in it, like an unseen arm around her. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel sat beside her, closer than before, not touching, but near enough that his presence felt like a promise left unspoken. The fire crackled. The wind brushed the roof. They watched each other in silence, as if the whole day had led them to this single point. A moment warm enough to reach something deeper than safety, something rising, slow but strong as the fire in the hearth, something that would carry them into the night that changes everything in the next part. A small storm rolled in just as darkness settled, not violent, only gusts hitting the wooden walls and the steady rush of rain striking the cabin roof like the rhythm of autumn turning into winter. Samuel rose to check the window, slid the latch closed, then turned back to the fire where Talia sat, her hands clasped tight for steadiness. "It's only the first rain of the season," he said softly, though his gaze deepened when he saw her shoulders tremble. "It's all right. The wind, it brings back things," Talia murmured, eyes fixed on the flames. "Nights when all I wanted was to run." Samuel sat beside her, closer than ever before, as if he understood distance was something she could not bear right now. "No one can hurt you here," he said, slow and plain. "You hear me? No one." The rain grew louder. Wind swept down the roof, and the room shuddered faintly. Talia flinched. Samuel lifted his hand, not touching her, only holding it out in quiet offer. She looked at that hand for a long moment, then laid hers into it. Samuel drew her nearer, only a small shift, yet enough to make her whole body loosen. As if she had finally stepped into a shelter meant for her, she leaned into his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart like hoofbeats over open ground. They stayed like that a long while, silent, wrapped in the cocoon the storm built around them. Their breaths crossed, soft, warm threads brushing along each other's collars. Talia lifted her face. Samuel turned too. The moment drew the room close until there was nothing but the two of them. Firelight softened his eyes, making them darker and warmer, filled with a patience born from years of keeping his own silence. Samuel raised his hand, slow as evening wind, and tipped her chin. "Talia." His voice roughened, low and gentle as wind through open fields. "You sure?" It wasn't doubt. It was the deepest respect he knew how to give. Talia set her hand over his chest, right where his heartbeat pounded firm and true. "I've never been surer." At those words, Samuel leaned in. The kiss came like warm wind through a storm night, slow, deep, full of feeling. Not rushed, not fierce, but the joining of two people starved for safe touch. His hand circled her waist, drawing her close, yet his hold stayed gentle, as if she were something he refused to harm even by breath. Talia's arms slipped around his neck, heat flowing from him down her spine. The wool coat slid from her shoulders as she leaned further into him, an unspoken surrender to being wanted and held with care. Samuel's chest warmed her forehead and cheek. Their breaths tangled, pausing only when a fingertip brushed her neck, her shoulder, her jaw. He set his lips along the line of her jaw, unhurried, savoring the truth that she was here, choosing him, trusting enough to fold into him without fear. Talia trembled, never from cold. "You all right?" His breath touched her skin. "I'm all right. With you," she said, voice soft enough to vanish into his shirt. They needed nothing more. No further step. Just two bodies resting into each other. Warm, real, unafraid. Firelight touched their skin in faint gold, enough for her to feel his hand glide slowly down her back, protective, careful. The storm still beat against the cabin, but inside, something quiet and deep rose between them, a bond without words, built from breath, heartbeat, and trust. At last, after long embraces meant to hold the world in place, Talia lay in Samuel's arms. Her head rested on his chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders with the instinct of a man tending a fire through a storm. Samuel pulled a light blanket over them. "Rain's easing," he whispered. But Talia had already fallen asleep, peaceful, safe in his hold, for the first time in years. Outside, the rain fell against the cabin in a gentle song. Inside Samuel, something new had begun. Talia woke as the first daylight slipped through the thin curtain, casting soft lines across the cabin's wooden grain. She blinked a few times, unsure where she was, until she felt the steady heartbeat beneath her ear. Samuel. She had fallen asleep on Samuel's chest. His arm was still around her shoulders, as if the storm still raged outside and he meant to shield her from every gust. The room was quiet, filled only with Samuel's even breath and the warm scent of his shirt pressed against her. Talia lifted her head slightly. Samuel opened his eyes at that exact moment. Their gazes met, shy, warm, deep enough that she drew a slow breath just to steady herself. "Morning." His voice was low, rough from waking. She nodded quickly, then looked away, afraid she would stare too long. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize when I fell asleep." "It's all right," Samuel said, the corner of his mouth easing. "I wanted you to sleep that way." The way he said it, not flirtation, but something honest and unguarded, sent a warm thrum through her chest. They rose, each straightening blankets and clothing. Talia adjusted her shawl while Samuel rekindled the fire to chase away the last chill of the storm. The air between them had changed. No tension, no distance. A quiet peace, as if the night had opened a door neither intended to close again. When the rain passed, Samuel led her behind the cabin to the stretch of grassland running toward the ridge. The air after the storm was so clear each breath felt washed in pine and damp earth. Talia walked barefoot on the grass, the cool ground rising against her skin. Samuel stayed beside her, steadying her with a hand at her back when she stumbled over a twig. "Careful," he said softly. Talia took his hand. A natural motion, so natural they both paused for a heartbeat in surprise. Then Samuel tightened his grip, not asking questions, accepting it as if her hand belonged there. They continued across the grass that way, hand in hand, silent yet full. At moments, Talia glanced at Samuel just to take in the rare peace of the morning. He noticed, but said nothing, letting the quiet speak for him. At the rocky overlook above Cedar Valley, Talia stopped. "It's been a long time," she whispered, "since I felt like I belonged anywhere." Samuel turned, placing his hand on her back again, right where she felt safest. "You belong wherever you can breathe," he said. "If it's here, good." She looked at him with gratitude deeper than words, but the world outside did not stand still. On their way down the trail toward town, Samuel needing a few supplies, a rider from Cedar Valley passed them. Mrs. Whitby, small, sharp-eyed, quicker with talk than thought. She spotted them instantly. Talia close beside Samuel, hair touched with mist, their hands still not fully apart. Mrs. Whitby raised her brows, letting her gaze drift down and up again, full of meaning. "Well, morning, to you two," she said, smiling with polite mischief. "Coming from the ridge, are you? Looks cozy." Talia flushed red. Samuel only tipped his head, silent, but his eyes darkened, knowing this would not end with a simple greeting. Within half a day, the rumor swept through town. Schoolteacher Talia Reed gone from Cedar Valley for 3 days, and seen returning with Samuel Barrett from the mountain. In the bakery, the general store, the saloon, everywhere the whispers carried tones of curiosity, pity, and satisfaction at finally having something new to discuss. At the far end of the street, Marcus heard the news first, and the smile that crossed his face was not a smile of amusement. It cracked open from something darker, deeper, something Talia had once known too well. Back at the foot of the ridge, Talia knew none of this. She only knew her hand was still resting in Samuel's, steady, warm, unshaken. For the first time in years, she was not running from a morning. She stepped into it, with him. The next morning, Samuel walked Talia back into town. The dirt road leading into Cedar Valley was still damp from the night rain, the scent of pine lingering in the wind. They walked side by side, not holding hands, yet close enough that each step felt shared. Talia sensed the townsfolk's eyes the moment she stepped through the school gate. Not unkind looks, but the familiar curiosity of a small place where private matters quickly became public talk. She heard 2 mothers whisper near the wall, "Where's Miss Reed been these days?" "I heard, with that Barrett fellow from the mountain." "Heavens, that quiet man? Folks say everyone's scared of him." Talia bent to sort her books, pretending not to hear, though her cheeks warmed. Not from shame, but because, for the first time in years, people whispered about her, and she did not feel small. When she looked up, she saw Samuel across the street near the blacksmith shop, hands in his coat pockets, leaning against the fence. He didn't move toward her. He only watched, an unspoken promise that if she needed him, she had only to look his way. It steadied her breath. During recess, as the children ran into the yard, Talia stood beneath the porch sorting papers. A familiar trace of cologne passed her, and she stiffened. Marcus. He approached without noise, without looming. He simply stopped half a step away, relaxed as if the meeting were accidental. "Talia," he said softly, "you look better than a few days ago. What do you want?" Her voice stayed even. "Want?" Marcus smiled, the same smile that once unsettled her, but now only made her wary. "I just wanted to talk. You vanished for days. I worried." "You don't need to worry about me," Talia answered plainly. Marcus tilted his head, his gaze dangerously gentle. "You always make me the villain in your story. But I only want to understand. We had good days once, didn't we?" Talia's body tensed. The past was not something she meant to revisit, least of all with him. Marcus reached as if to touch her wrist, a small gesture, but the kind that had once made her chest tighten for years. Before his fingers reached her, a different hand rested lightly on her back, right where she always stood straight again. Samuel. He didn't pull her away, didn't push in. He merely set his warm, broad hand on her back, a gesture clear enough for Marcus, gentle enough for Talia to know she wasn't alone. "Miss Reed needs to return to class," Samuel said, voice low but calm. "The children are waiting." Marcus lowered his hand, the smile thinning. "Mr. Barrett," he greeted with practiced politeness. "I was speaking privately with my ex-wife." "She doesn't want to speak," Samuel answered, eyes steady on him, not threatening, not tense, just solid as iron. Marcus paused, measuring the scene. Talia stood between the two men, and for the first time in her life, she chose where she stood. She stepped half a pace back, toward Samuel, not to flee Marcus, but to move toward where she felt safe. Samuel dipped his head slightly, his hand on her back shifting just enough to ask, "You all right?" Talia answered with a slow breath. "You need to leave me alone, Marcus. I'm not who I used to be." Marcus stared at her for a long time, not angry, not jealous. But something in his eyes darkened, a recognition that the power he once held over her no longer worked. For the first time, Marcus understood. She had changed, and the man behind her was part of the reason. He fastened his coat, his voice soft but cold. "You think you're stronger because someone stands with you. Talia, you don't know the whole of it." Samuel stepped forward half a pace, enough for Marcus to see his patience had limits. "Talia doesn't need anyone to make her strong," he said. "She already is." His voice stayed calm as the mountain, but his gaze cut sharp. Marcus pressed his lips together, shrugged, and walked away, not hurried, but without his usual air of triumph. Talia watched him go, her heart steadier than before. Samuel remained beside her, his hand on her back easing. She turned to him, gratitude clear in her eyes. "I'm all right now," she whispered. Samuel only nodded, but she saw in his eyes a quiet resolve taking shape. In Cedar Valley, folks talked about many things, but nothing spread faster than the sight of school teacher Talia Reed stepping into the yard, standing beside Samuel Barrett, choosing to lean toward him whenever her ex-husband drew near. The rumors drifted across town like wind over the grassland, and an undercurrent began to rise, carrying their story into its next turn. Late afternoon wind drifted down from Sienna Ridge, carrying a cold edge that made the curtains in the teacher's room stir. Talia sat by the window, the last sunlight settling over her hands, gold and faint like a memory untouched for years. When Samuel stepped inside, quiet as always, she knew him by the sound of his boots alone. "Talia." His voice was low, steady, asking nothing of her. She lifted her head. In that instant, Samuel saw something in her eyes, something that had slipped free from a place she had kept locked for a long time. "Do you have a moment?" Her voice trembled. Samuel came closer, not sitting across from her like a man preparing to hear a confession, but beside her, close enough for their shoulders to brush when she turned. Talia drew a long breath, gathering whatever courage she had left. "I've never told anyone this," she began, staring down at her hands woven together. "Because I always thought that if I said it out loud, I'd sound like someone too weak to defend herself." Samuel didn't interrupt. No nod. No comforting words. Only his hand resting on the back of her chair. His presence a quiet support behind her. "Marcus never hit me," Talia said, slow, each word placed with care. "That's the first thing people always ask. But he knew. There are things that break a person without leaving a mark." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "He said I should give up piano because it made me dreamy. He said I didn't need friends because I had him. He said my little hopes were nothing." She paused, her throat tightening. "3 years of that," she whispered. "I forgot what I wanted. I woke up, ate, smiled, listened, until I convinced myself that was normal." Samuel reached out, not touching her yet, only offering his hand. Open. Waiting. Talia stared at it for several seconds, then placed her hand in his. He closed his fingers around hers, gentle, his thumb brushing a warm line across her skin. The touch made her bite her lip to keep tears from spilling. "I left him one morning," she said. "Not because I was brave, but because I realized I'd cried the whole night without noticing. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't know if that woman deserved to be loved anymore." Tears dropped onto her hand, and Samuel's grip tightened a little, as if he meant to give her enough strength for both of them. "Talia," he said quietly, softer than rain. "None of that was your fault." Her chest constricted. She turned toward him, as if finally seeing the truth she had avoided for years. "Samuel, I'm tired." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to go back to that place, not even in memory." Samuel lifted his other arm and drew her gently against him. He didn't kiss her, didn't hold her too tight. He simply wrapped her in an embrace, his chin resting atop her hair, his breath warm against her ear, steady as a lullaby. She cried into him. Not from pain, but from something unfastening inside her, something she had carried too long. "You never have to go back there," Samuel said, voice firm as the mountain's stone. Talia pressed her face into his chest, gripping his shirt like someone afraid of losing her footing. Samuel kissed the crown of her head, soft, with no desire woven into it, only tenderness meant to keep each bruised piece of her intact. After a long while, when her tears eased, Talia rested against him, eyes still red but clearer. "I want to live according to what I choose," she said, almost confessing. "Even if people talk, even if the whole town watches, I want to live truthfully, With you. Samuel lifted a hand to her cheek, brushing away a loose strand damp from tears. Then that's how we'll live. His voice wasn't a promise, only a truth already decided. Talia held his wrist, leaning her forehead to his, letting the silence seal what words could not. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The choice was already in the breath between them. And from that moment on, there was no going back. The news came on a wind-heavy afternoon. Talia had just finished her last lesson and was gathering her books when the headmaster tapped lightly on the classroom door. "Miss Reed, someone from the county court has delivered papers for you." An ordinary sentence, yet the air in the room thickened at once. Talia froze, her hand still on the edge of the desk, a cold line creeping up her spine. I'm not expecting anything," she whispered, almost to herself. The courier handed her an envelope sealed in red. Talia opened it, her eyes skimming the dry, formal lines. Petition for marital status review, filed by Marcus Hale. Reason: marital rights review, request for respondent to appear. Her hand shook hard enough to nearly drop the page. Marcus didn't threaten her. He didn't shout. He didn't pull at her wrist in public. He chose something far more dangerous, pulling her back through the law. She stepped back, bumping into the desk, her heart thudding in sharp, uneven beats. Memories of those years, quiet, suffocating control, rose all at once, not in noise but in the familiar, choking silence they came from. "Talia." Samuel appeared in the doorway, as if some instinct had led him straight to her the moment she faltered. His eyes landed on the paper in her hand, then on the drained look on her face. In a single breath, he understood. Talia tried to speak, but no sound came out. Samuel stepped forward and laid both warm, steady hands on her shoulders, guiding her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me," he said, voice low and firm as stone. "No one decides your life but you anymore." That single word, anymore, struck something deep in her. Tears slipped down her cheeks quietly, the kind that come from holding too much too long. Samuel pulled her into his arms, not to shield her, but to remind her she was standing in the present, not trapped in the past. When the news spread, Cedar Valley split cleanly in two. Some stood with Talia. She's been through enough. A woman deserves the life she chooses. The court ought to free her. But others defended Marcus with cold practicality. He's got legal rights. Separation isn't the same as ending responsibility. Women imagine things sometimes. Walking through town felt like walking between two rivers, pulling in opposite directions. Every look on her made her feel torn in half, but each time she faltered, one glance over her shoulder was enough. Samuel was somewhere nearby. He didn't join the arguments. He simply existed like a reminder. The next day, Samuel took her to the county attorney's office to meet Clara Danvers, an older woman with sharp eyes, known for defending women in cases like hers. "Talia," Mrs. Danvers said after reading the file, "this isn't a legal battle about property or blame. This is about reclaiming your voice." Talia lowered her head. "I never stood up to him. Not once." "Then this is your moment," Samuel said beside her. Not as encouragement, not as pressure, but as truth he believed she was ready for. Mrs. Danvers required 3 types of proof: witnesses who saw Marcus's control, evidence Talia had built an independent life, and confirmation she came to Cedar Valley seeking freedom, not fleeing wrongdoing. Samuel stepped forward first. I'll testify, he said without hesitation. Talia turned toward him, her heart jolting in her chest. Samuel, people will talk about you. They already have, he replied, calm as ever. And I don't live by their talk. The words steadied her more than anything else that day. That afternoon, as they left the courthouse, wind swept along the main street, carrying the murmurs of the town. Miss Reed's going up against Marcus. Barrett's standing behind her. Are they together now? Across the street, Marcus stood with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes sharp, calculating his next move. Talia looked at him, and for the first time she didn't lower her eyes, didn't tremble, didn't step back. Samuel stood beside her, not touching her, yet his presence alone made air fill her lungs again. Marcus watched them a moment, then turned away. Not retreating, preparing. Talia clutched her coat at the collar. I'm scared, she whispered. Samuel laid his hand on her back, light, steady, every muscle in his arm telling her he was there. Be scared, he said. I'm right here. And for the first time in years, Talia believed that even if a storm was coming, she would not face it alone. The morning of the hearing, Cedar Valley woke under a heaviness as thick as mist. Townsfolk gathered along both sides of the main street, waiting to witness what the whole town had whispered about for nearly a week. Whether Talia Reed, the quiet, gentle schoolteacher, would be ordered by the town council to return to her former husband. Talia climbed the steps of the town hall, her hands gripping the familiar shawl. Each step felt weighted with years of restraint and fears worn into her bones. But today, she wasn't walking alone. Samuel walked behind her, not close, not holding her arm, just near enough that when the wind blew and she faltered, she could feel his warmth against her back, a silent reminder. I'm here. Inside, the council sat in a long row. Marcus stood across the room, dressed neatly, face smooth and unreadable, yet his eyes carried the same certainty he always had, that he would win. Marcus trusted power and law. They had long worked in his favor. Talia faced them. The room fell utterly still. The headmaster, several parents, and townsfolk filled the back, some supporting her, some doubtful, some simply curious. Samuel stood behind her, his hand resting lightly at the center of her back, the place that had become her anchor these past days. No one objected. No one asked him to step aside. Everyone understood. She needed him there. The council chair motioned for her to begin. Talia drew a breath. Her hands trembled, but her eyes shone like a star long hidden behind clouds. Members of the council, she said, her voice soft at first, but clear. I'm not here to fight anyone. I'm here because I want a life where I can breathe. People in the front row shifted, listening more closely. I lived many years in silence, Talia continued. Not because I chose it, but because I believed I wasn't allowed to want anything else. I gave up music, friends, even myself, thinking that was stability. She paused. Samuel pressed his thumb gently against her back, unseen but enough to steady her. Marriage is not a prison, she said, her voice gaining strength. I wasn't hit, but I was made small, day by day, until I no longer knew who I was. A murmur rippled through the room. No one expected this from the quiet teacher. When I left, I didn't flee. I walked out because I wanted to live. I wanted to teach children, to work honestly, to wake up without fear. She lifted her gaze to the council. Her eyes no longer shook. I ask only for the right to live peacefully, the right to choose where I belong, the right to be loved without losing myself. Not a breath moved in the room, not even Marcus. And I testify, Talia said slowly, that my former marriage is no longer a safe place for me, emotionally or in the future. She bowed her head. That is all. The council chair asked a few questions. Attorney Danvers presented the witnesses, the headmaster, and two parents stepped forward, confirming how Marcus had tried to interfere with Talia's routines. Then Samuel stepped up. Calm, grounded, he spoke only 2 sentences. Talia Reed has built her life in Cedar Valley without relying on him, and she deserves her peace. People in the room looked at Samuel as if seeing a stone cliff standing firm in strong wind. Marcus said little. His silence no longer held confidence, only the first signs of a crack. By afternoon, the council delivered its decision. Talia Reed is not obligated to return to her former marriage. She is granted full freedom in residence, livelihood, and personal choice. The hearing is concluded. Talia heard the words as if hearing ropes fall from her shoulders. Marcus stood still, his mouth tightening once. Then he turned away. No farewell, no argument. Only the posture of a man trying to hold on to the last fragments of pride. The hall doors closed behind him. Talia broke into tears. Not from sorrow, not from relief alone, but because, for the first time in many years, she was truly, wholly free. Samuel stepped forward without a word. He drew her into his arms, his hand smoothing gently over her hair, his breath warm against her temple, a silent vow. You're safe. She held him for a long time, her tears falling against his shirt. But this time they carried no fear. They carried light. Light from the life beginning before her. After the hearing, life around Cedar Valley seemed to settle into place again. No more lingering stares, no more half-whispered gossip. The town slipped back into its usual rhythm, or perhaps it was simply learning to accept a new truth. Talia Reed no longer walked with her shoulders drawn in. She walked upright, breathed deeply, and her smile, the one hidden through years of fear, returned, light as a blade of grass moving in the wind. Samuel, though a man of few words, changed in ways only those who truly watched could see. He stood a little closer when they walked through town. His gaze softened when she spoke to children, and every small act he made carried the quiet care of someone who had decided to protect what he loved. One afternoon, with the wind carrying soil and pollen from distant fields, Samuel led her to an empty plot near the edge of town. Far enough to be peaceful, close enough for her to reach the schoolhouse without long travel. On that land stood a half-built cabin. 4 wooden walls, a rising roof, a window frame facing the sunset. Unfinished, but already shaped into a home. When did you start this? Talia asked, her voice small, as if afraid happiness within reach might make her tremble. After the hearing, Samuel said, setting his hammer down. I figured, if you wanted to stay in Cedar Valley, you'd need a place that was yours. Talia smiled, eyes brimming, not with overwhelming emotion, but with the quiet opening of a heart finally given room to breathe. Samuel, I don't know what to say. You don't need to, he answered. Seeing you come here is enough. And she came. Every evening, bringing pies still warm from the oven, bringing stories of her students, bringing the soft laughter of someone learning to live her new life with as much gentleness as she could. They repaired the roof together, added shelves, chose curtains, measured the porch. Their hands brushed whenever they lifted a board, and neither pulled away anymore. The times Samuel tucked her hair behind her ear when the wind blew no longer made her blush. They had become part of the quiet language between two people who belonged together. One sunset, with the last light staining the new boards a deep orange, Talia stood at the unfinished windowsill, her palm resting on the frame waiting for glass. Samuel stepped up behind her, the scent of leather from his coat mixing with pine wood and the cinnamon she had brought. "Talia," he said softly, as if calling something more important than her name. She turned. The space between them was no more than a breath. Samuel lifted his hand and set it gently against her cheek, his fingers warm, as if confirming what his heart had known for a long time. "This house," he said, voice quieter than the wind. "Would you want it to be our home?" Talia looked into his eyes, the eyes that once made her feel safe and now made her feel chosen. She stepped closer, touching, her forehead to his, just as she had by the cabin at the mountain's base. Their breaths mingled, carrying her answer. She nodded, soft, but sure as a vow that needed no words. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, holding the feeling. When he opened them again, his gaze was so tender she felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from the sense that she had finally stepped into her life without trembling. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He only placed a hand on her back and drew her close, as if holding the warmth between them just a little longer. The sun dipped lower, spreading gold across the new cabin. Wind brushed the grass, carrying the scent of early spring, season of growth, beginnings, and things built by hand and heart. Talia took Samuel's hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers. They stood before their cabin, their new home, their new life, bathed in the evening light falling over fresh wood like a blessing over the path they had chosen. From that moment on, there was no doubt left. They had chosen each other, and this time, it was real.